All right, everyone, depending on who you ask, the situation in Venezuela is either the early revolutionary stage of liberation against tyranny or it's a CIA-sponsored coup, which is the funniest argument. I say it's kind of a coup, but I don't think the CIA needed to be involved. Specifically because if you look at the quality of life and the way that Venezuelan people have degraded from a really rising regional power to sub-third world in many aspects, hyperinflated currency, no food availability, shortage of every good and medicine, tyranny, tyrannization, live fire on crowds at this point, reportedly. When you look at that, can't you understand why the Venezuelan people would be a little bit upset and maybe want to overthrow Maduro? So what's happened is you've got an interesting scenario. This is my takeaway from this. This is the funny part to me. What's happening in Venezuela is not funny at all, but there is one amusing, very ironic aspect, which is, and link in the description, Codepink in this case. There are groups of leftists who have spent the last 2 years saying Trump is a pawn of Russia, Russia man bad, Putin is Hitler, and so is Trump, and stuff like that, that are actually technically siding with Russia diplomatically on the issue of Venezuela. You see, the Russians have backed Maduro. The Russians declare Maduro is the legitimately elected democratic leader of democratically socialist Venezuela. We recognize him. Erdogan has done so. These people have spent the last year reaming Erdogan over the issue of the Kurds and certain other policies. Mexico has decided to back Maduro. They were worried because the new president there is technically a populist. Cuba, which isn't a huge surprise. Everyone else in the American hemisphere other than Bolivia, Mexico, and Cuba have recognized, and this includes Bolsonaro, I think Chile and all the others, Canada, have recognized the self-declared interim president, Juan Guaido. Now, what I would say is, my hope is this. Some people are saying, well, you support involvement in Venezuela and war. See, Styx isn't anti-war after all. Not true. I do not support invading Venezuela. I hope there's no invasion by their neighbors. My hope, my honest hope, is that the people of Venezuela picket at such large numbers that Venezuela comes to a halt. Maduro is no longer capable of governing in any capacity, and the military decides to oust him. That's what I'm hoping will happen. A bloodless coup of sorts in which the only real fighting will be between the Venezuelan people and military combined against certain socialist guerrilla movements within the country that might not even really care at the end of the day because most of the opposition are also socialists. They just don't want Maduro to be the socialist in power. And that's my fear, and that's what I've said consistently, is that if Maduro gets ousted, that's great. Maduro's evil, he's crazy, and he's certainly corrupt. What's the alternative for the Venezuelan people? Your currency is already hyperinflated. The oil prices are not going to demonstrably rise in the near future, I don't think. That's your only main export. Your economy is not diversified. And you have an internal situation where large swaths of even the opposition, I think, would oppose the idea of allowing the international community to do the only thing it can do in such a situation, which is it comes in, it grabs up some territory and develops it, it grabs up businesses, it grabs up stock holdings and everything else, wealth basically, and pumps investment into the country to stabilize things. The problem is the Venezuelan people have been told that everyone else around them wants to rob them of their oil. The only thing there to develop at the moment is oil. So it's certainly going to be a self-fulfilling sort of situation where everything Maduro has told them would happen in such a situation will pretty much come true. That's pretty bad because what might end up happening is a counter-revolution. They say, well, this is worse than before. We're going to kick the foreigners out. When things don't immediately get better, they kick them back out, put hardliners back in charge. Maybe even Maduro himself if he hasn't been hanged by that point. That's my big worry. My suggestion to the world is to use a lot of carrots and no sticks at the moment. Sticks. It's very funny anytime I have to say that. Don't pressure Venezuela at all. Recognize Guaido. And if Maduro gets kicked out, immediately bail them out. Yeah, throw a bunch of money at Venezuela, come in with an eye to benevolence in order to develop a part of the American hemisphere for stability's sake. Allow the Western world to coalesce and do so to create a stable, non-tyrannical, non-socialistic nation in the Americas with huge resources we can trade with. They will be enriched. We will long-term be enriched. And certainly, in a military sense, massively empowered. Having Venezuela and also Cuba in this hemisphere weakens U.S. resolve in a big way. It would be better to use a lot of carrots and no sticks. And we sort of tried that with Cuba. By the way, it turns out, I saw this story. I can't confirm whether this is bullshit or not, but it seems that scientists determined that the sonic weapon involved there might not have been a weapon. It might have been crickets. Just really, really loud sorts of crickets that live in that part of Cuba. Somehow the acoustics of the building involved were being amplified to the point where people were having like mental difficulties, and they probably, the brain damage that they might have been associated with this, they could have been literally due to sleep deprivation, lack of REM sleep because of the noise of these crickets. Wouldn't that be quite something if we almost accidentally threw away diplomatic relations with a country that we just broke a, 50-year embargo on, or 60 years of some crazy shit because of a bunch of fucking crickets? That'd be crazy. Venezuela, I want Venezuela to be wealthy. It's sort of like the situation in North Korea. I don't want the North Koreans to suffer, and I certainly don't fucking want war. But something has to happen. Trump is striking the right tone there. My hope is he does that with Venezuela, as opposed to maybe what he's done with Iran. I want him to strike a more conciliatory tone there. Use, again, lure people in, not for malevolent purposes, like, oh, I'm going to lure you in and then mistreat you or something. No, you don't need to mistreat anyone at all. What you need is more peace in the world. I think Trump understands that. We'll have to wait and see what options on the table are actually used with regards to Venezuela. If Maduro is recognized by pretty much the rest of the hemisphere as illegitimate, at what point do they say, well, you've got mass poverty and tyranny, you've got, attacks on his own people, he's not legitimate according to our legal standards anymore. At what point do they begin to foment ousting him themselves and not really waiting for the Venezuelan people or military? I hope it doesn't come to that. I fear that it might. I hope it doesn't. My hope is the military there revolts against Maduro. But it's very, very funny to see left-wing groups like Codepink coming out and backing Maduro when they've spent this whole time saying, well, Russia this, Russia that, Russia evil. Russia backs Maduro too. Does that make you a bunch of Russian pawns? Like, is Codepink saying, okay, yes, Komradsky, Putin, we will do your bidding? Very, very interesting. But there's no self-awareness there, so they don't realize how dumb that looks. They just don't fucking understand. Meanwhile, I'm saying, well, I don't fucking care who Russia backs. I'm looking at the situation and saying, yeah, I suppose the opposition is marginally better than Maduro, and at least if they get in there, there is the hope. There's the possibility of stability and peace within Venezuela. There's no possibility of that under Maduro. It's basically like, hey, what's behind door number 1? It might be a pile of spiders that we're going to put all over your body, but it also might be a banana. But what's behind door number 2? You know that it's a jar of spiders that we're going to attach to your fucking nipples. Okay, which door are you going to choose? You got a chance of getting a banana. It might be less than a 50-50 chance. Maybe there's 2 jars of spiders in there. Hey, who knows? What I would say is I hope that Maduro's ousted, and I hope that it's as bloodless as possible. When I'm looking at pictures of literally millions of people all over Venezuela taking to the streets, it's like, how much longer is Maduro going to be? Yeah, they were holding counter rallies as well. And you'd see like 10 people in red shirts with like Hail Maduro signs, and then there's like 10,000 people walking past them, shouting them down. Kind of lopsided. I'm not thinking that the last election there was quite legitimate. But that could just be me. I mean, maybe the CIA is mind controlling me. Maybe I'm a shill. I sold out and I got money from the CIA or something. I think that there are people that actually believe it. Maybe they're getting money from Maduro or from Codepink, apparently. That's about all. Peace out.